Picture the world before memory, not before your memory or mine, but before the first syllable was ever carved into stone, before the first fire was tamed, before the first human hand pressed into wet clay and left behind proof of existence. Go back further still. The sky is wider then, the forest deeper, the silence absolute. In this world, the mountains are younger, their peaks still sharp and unweathered. Rivers carve paths through valleys that have never known a name. The air tastes different, thicker, perhaps heavy with moisture, and the scent of vegetation so dense it feels like breathing through green wool. There are no roads, no cities, no borders drawn by kings or conquered by armies. But there are marks, not everywhere, not obvious, but present if you know where to look. A depression in the bedrock, too symmetrical to be erosion. A stone displaced, resting at an angle that defies the logic of glaciers or floods. A pattern in the landscape that suggests intention, though no one living can say whose. Mainstream science tells us that Earth's ancient past belonged to creatures we now understand. Dinosaurs, mammoths, terror birds, reptiles the size of buses. The fossil record is clear. The timeline is established. Humanity, as we know it, is a recent arrival, a blink in geological time, appearing only after the great extinctions had already swept the stage clean. But what if the stage was never truly empty? What if, in the long silence between the age of reptiles and the rise of man, something else walked here? Something large enough to move stones we struggle to lift with cranes. Something intelligent enough to leave behind not bones, but ideas, echoes in myth, whispers in legend, shadows cast across every culture that would later rise. The earth itself feels larger in this moment, not because it was, but because the beings who walked it understood scale differently. To them, a mountain was not an obstacle, it was a neighbor. A forest was not a barrier, it was a garden. And the stones, those immense, silent stones we find scattered across continents, were not monuments. They were tools. This is not a story with clear answers. It is not a tale that ends neatly, with evidence cataloged and conclusions drawn. It is, instead, an invitation to stand at the edge of what we know and peer into the vastness of what we do not. Before the footprints we recognize, there may have been others, larger, deeper, worn smooth by time and buried beneath the weight of ages. This is where we begin. Every culture has its giants. In ancient Greece, they were called Titans, beings of immense size and strength, born from the primordial forces of earth and sky. They ruled before the gods, before Olympus, before Zeus cast down his father and claimed dominion over the heavens. The Titans were older than order itself, embodiments of raw, untamed power. Across the cold northern seas, the Norse spoke of Jitner giants who lived in Jotunheim, a realm of ice and stone beyond the reach of mortal men. These were not mindless brutes. They were wise, cunning, capable of magic and prophecy. Some even intermarried with the gods, blurring the line between divine and monstrous. In the deserts of the Near East, ancient Hebrew texts mention the Nephilim, giants born when the sons of God came to the daughters of men. They were described as mighty warriors, legends in their own time, beings whose very existence was framed as an aberration, a disruption in the natural order so profound that it preceded the Great Flood. The Polynesians told of enormous ancestors who lifted islands from the sea. The Aztecs remembered the Quinametsin, giants who built the pyramids long before human hands touched the stones. In Hindu cosmology, the Datyas and Danamas were titanic beings locked in eternal struggle with the gods, their battles shaping the very fabric of reality. Mainstream scholarship approaches these stories with caution and context. Myths, they remind us, are not historical records. They are cultural expressions, metaphors for natural forces, allegories for human ambition and hubris. The Titans represent chaos before order. The giants symbolize the untamed wilderness that civilization must conquer. These are stories, not evidence. But alternative thinkers ask a different question. Why do these stories exist everywhere? Not just in one culture, but in dozens separated by oceans, by millennia, by languages that share no common root. Why does nearly every corner of the ancient world remember a time when beings larger than humans walked the earth? Why do they describe them not as animals, but as intelligent, organized, and capable of great works? Coincidence is a fragile explanation when the pattern is global. Perhaps these myths are not describing the same beings, but the same memory. A memory so old it fractured into different languages, different names, different details, but always carrying the same core truth. Before us, there were others. Larger, stronger, present. And then, for reasons the stories struggle to explain, they were gone. Some myths say the giants were overthrown in war. Others say they were drowned in floods, consumed by fire, or simply faded as the world changed. A few suggest they never truly vanished, that their blood still runs in certain lineages, that their bones rest beneath our cities, waiting to be found. Mainstream science dismisses these as fantasy, but the stories do not go away. They linger in the margins of history, too persistent to ignore, too widespread to be accidental. If myths are cultural memory compressed across generations, then the question becomes, what are they remembering? The earth has always made giants. This much is undeniable. Walk through any natural history museum, and you will find them reconstructed skeletons of creatures, so large they defy intuition. The long-necked sauropods, whose bodies stretched over 100 feet from head to tail. The woolly mammoths, whose tusks curved like scythes and whose footsteps shook the frozen tundra. The giant ground sloths, larger than modern elephants, whose claws could strip bark from trees in a single swipe. These were real. Their bones are catalogued, studied, displayed. Science has no trouble acknowledging that Earth once hosted life on a scale that dwarfs the present. But these were animals. Not builders, not architects, not beings who looked up at the stars and wondered what they meant. The legends, though, describe something else. They describe humanoid giants, beings with hands, not hooves. Beings who spoke, who built, who passed down knowledge. Beings who stood upright and shaped the world with deliberate intent. Mainstream paleontology offers no such creature. The fossil record shows no humanoid species of titanic size. Homo sapiens evolved relatively small, averaging 5 to 6 feet in height. Our extinct cousins Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo erectus were similar in stature. Even the largest known primate, Gigantopithecus, stood perhaps 10 feet tall and lived a simple, herbivorous life in the forests of Asia. Impressive, but not the civilization builders of myth. So why the disconnect? One possibility is that the myths are simply exaggerations. Early humans, encountering the bones of mammoths or dinosaurs, may have misinterpreted them as humanoid remains. Lacking the framework of paleontology, they imagined giants where only megafauna existed. But another possibility lingers in the margins of speculation. What if the giants of legend were not animals at all, but something more rare, more elusive? What if they lived in smaller numbers, in remote regions, and left behind so little physical evidence that their remains are either undiscovered or unrecognized? Fossilization is extraordinarily rare. It requires specific conditions, rapid burial, mineralization, geological stability over millions of years. The vast majority of creatures that ever lived left no bones behind. Could it be that intelligent giants, if they existed, were few enough, isolated enough, or unlucky enough that their remains dissolved into time? It is a tenuous thread to pull. Science requires evidence, and the evidence for humanoid giants is not there, at least, not in a form that withstands scrutiny. Yet the stories remain, and the stones remain, and in the space between what we can prove and what we cannot quite explain, the question persists. If Earth made giants of flesh and bone, could it not also have made giants of mind and hand? There was a time when size defined survival. Imagine standing at the edge of a forest 30,000 years ago. You are human small, fragile, armed with nothing but sharpened stone and fire. And emerging from the trees is a mammoth. Not a picture of a mammoth. Not a skeleton behind glass. A living mammoth, breathing steam into the cold air, its tusks curving upward like twin moons, its footfalls echoing through your chest. You are 5 feet tall. It is 13. This was normal. For tens of thousands of years, humans shared the earth with creatures so large they redefined what power meant. Mammoths, mastodons, giant cave bears, Megaloceros, the great Irish elk, whose antlers spanned 12 feet, saber-toothed cats that hunted in packs and could bring down prey 3 times their size. To early humans, scale was not abstract, it was a daily reality. And that reality seeped into their art, their rituals, their myths. In the caves of Lascaux, Chauvet, and Altamira, humans painted the giants they knew, not as monsters, but as neighbors. They depicted them with reverence, with precision, with an attention to detail that suggests deep familiarity. These were not fantasies, they were memories, frozen on stone walls by firelight. Anthropologists believe that these depictions served multiple purposes: hunting maps, spiritual totems, teaching tools. But they also reflect something else, a world where humans were not the largest thing in the room. When a child grew up watching mammoths cross the plains when a hunter had to, calculate whether a giant sloth was too dangerous to approach. When every generation passed down stories of ancestors who faced creatures the size of houses size became mythic. It became divine. And when those giants began to disappear, mammoth populations collapsing, megafauna vanishing into extinction, the absence must have felt apocalyptic. Perhaps that is where the myths began, not as fabrications, but as memories of a world that once was. A world where giants, real, tangible, breathing giants, walked alongside humanity. And when the last mammoth fell, when the last cave bear retreated into the dark, humans may have looked at the bones left behind and wondered, were these the only giants? Or were there others we never saw? For centuries, farmers have unearthed mysteries. A plow strikes something hard beneath the soil. A well digger pulls up a fragment of bone, impossibly large, too heavy to lift alone. A landslide reveals a rib cage jutting from a cliff face, each rib as thick as a human thigh. Before the science of paleontology existed, these discoveries were interpreted through the only framework available: giants. In medieval Europe, enormous bones were displayed in churches and castles as relics of biblical Nephilim. In 1577, Swiss authorities identified a massive femur found near Lucerne as belonging to a human giant 19 feet tall. It was later revealed to be the bone of a mammoth, but for centuries, it stood as proof of a mythic past. In 1613, a skeleton was uncovered near the French village of Saint-Prest. Witnesses claimed it measured 17 feet from head to toe. The bones were examined by physicians and scholars, who declared them human. They were lost to history before modern analysis could test that claim. In 1895, miners in County Antrim, Ireland, blasted through rock and discovered a petrified giant over 12 feet tall. Photographs were taken. Newspapers ran the story. Then, quietly, the bones disappeared. Some said they were shipped to a private collection. Others claimed they were destroyed. No trace remains. The pattern repeats across centuries and continents. Discoveries made, witnesses claimed, bones vanished. Mainstream archaeology explains most of these cases as misidentifications. Mammoth femurs, elephant skulls, even whale vertebrae were mistaken for human remains by people unfamiliar with comparative anatomy. Once paleontology emerged as a discipline in the 19th century, many of these giant bones were correctly reclassified. But not all of them. Some reports describe bones that do not match known megafauna, skulls with humanoid features, femurs proportioned like human legs, but scaled impossibly large. Articulated skeletons laid out in burial positions, suggesting deliberate interment. Skeptics argue these are hoaxes or exaggerations. Believers point to the consistency of the reports. Different times, different places, same descriptions. And then there is the question of what happened to the bones. Many early museums lacked proper cataloging systems. Specimens were stored haphazardly, damaged by floods or fires, discarded during renovations. Entire collections had been lost to time. Could some of those lost bones have been evidence of something we no longer have access to? The Smithsonian Institution has been accused, in alternative circles, of actively suppressing evidence of giant skeletons. Mainstream historians dismiss this as conspiracy theory, pointing out that no credible documentation supports such claims. But the stories persist, and in the absence of bones, what remains is doubt. Not proof, but the ghost of a question. If even one of those discoveries was real, what does that mean for the history we think we know? Mainstream timelines place the rise of advanced human civilization within the last 10,000 years. The Neolithic Revolution, when humans transitioned from nomadic hunting to settled agriculture, began around 10,000 BCE. The first cities emerged in Mesopotamia around 4000 BCE. Writing appeared shortly after. Everything we call history fits neatly into this window. Before that, we are told, humans existed in small, scattered groups, hunter-gatherers, nomads, survivors, not builders. But what if that window is incomplete? Alternative researchers point to anomalies that suggest human activity or something like it, far earlier than accepted chronology allows. The Sphinx, for example. Mainstream Egyptology dates the Sphinx to around 2500 BCE, built during the reign of Pharaoh Khafor. But geologist Robert Schoch observed water erosion patterns on the Sphinx's body that suggest exposure to prolonged rainfall, something that did not occur in Egypt after 5000 BCE when the climate became arid. If the erosion is from rain, the Sphinx must be older, perhaps much older. Then there are the megalithic sites. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, dated to 9600 BCE, features carved stone pillars arranged in circular complexes. It predates agriculture, predates pottery, predates permanent settlements. Yet it required planning, labor, and skill far beyond what we associate with primitive hunter-gatherers. Gunung Padang in Indonesia shows signs of construction dating back over 20,000 years, according to some geological surveys. Mainstream archaeologists dispute this, but the debate remains unresolved. These sites raise uncomfortable questions. If humans were capable of such work so long ago, what else were they capable of? And if not humans, then who? Some alternative theories propose that advanced civilizations rose and fell long before recorded history. That cataclysms, floods, impacts, volcanic winters erased them so completely that only fragments remain. That humanity, as we know it, is not the first chapter, but the second or third. Graham Hancock and others have popularized the idea of a lost civilization, an advanced society predating known history, whose survivors passed down fragmented knowledge to later cultures. Mainstream academics criticize this as speculative, lacking hard evidence. But the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. If a civilization existed 15,000 years ago, before the last ice age ended, much of their world would now be underwater. Sea levels have risen over 400 feet since the glaciers melted. Entire coastlines, where ancient peoples would have lived, are now submerged beneath continental shelves. Could the traces of that world be beneath the waves? And if such a civilization existed, could it have coexisted with beings larger than itself, beings we now remember only as myths? The timeline of human history is not as solid as it appears. It is a framework built on fragments, inferences, and the assumption that what we have found is all there is to find. But the earth is older than our certainty, and the silence of the deep past does not mean it was empty. There are walls that should not exist, not because they are impossible, but because their construction defies the logic of the civilizations that supposedly built them. In Baalbek, Lebanon, the ancient Roman temple complex rests upon a foundation of stones so massive they are called the trilithon. 3 blocks, each weighing approximately 800 tons, fitted so precisely that a blade cannot slip between them. Nearby lies the stone of the pregnant woman, a single block weighing over 1,000 tons, still partially attached to the bedrock quarry. Roman engineers are credited with building the temple above, but the foundation stones are older, their origin uncertain. No Roman text describes how they were moved. No tool marks indicate the method. They simply exist, as if placed by hands that understood mass differently. In Cusco, Peru, the walls of Saxo Aman feature stones weighing over 200 tons, cut with edges so intricate they interlock like puzzle pieces. No mortar, no gaps. Some blocks have 12 angles, each one perfectly fitted to its neighbor. The Inca, who inhabited the region when the Spanish arrived, claimed they did not build these walls. They said the structures were already ancient when their ancestors found them, constructed by a race of giants in a time before memory. At Ollantaytambo, massive blocks of red granite were transported from a quarry 6 miles away, across a river, up a mountain. Each stone weighs dozens of tons. Modern engineers admit they do not know how this was done with the technology available at the time. On Easter Island, the Moai statues, some weighing up to 80 tons, were carved from volcanic rock and transported across the island. Local legend says they walked into place, moved by mana, spiritual power. Archaeologists suggest ropes and sledges, but experimental attempts have been only partially successful. Mainstream archaeology attributes these feats to ingenuity, labor, and time. Thousands of workers, simple tools, clever techniques. Levers, ramps, rollers, sledges. Patience measured in generations. And in many cases, this explanation holds. But in some cases, it strains. When engineers today use cranes rated for 1,200 tons and still struggle to replicate ancient stone placement, when computer models suggest certain configurations should have been unstable, when tool marks do not match the hardness of the stone, questions multiply. Were these structures built by giants? Or were they built for giants? Or perhaps by a civilization that remembered giants and sought to build in their image, to honor them, to prove that even in their absence, humanity could touch the same scale? Alternative thinkers suggest that some megalithic sites may predate the cultures that claimed them, that humans inherited these structures, attributed them to gods or ancestors, and built their own civilizations in the shadows of older works. If titans existed, if they truly walked the earth, they would not have needed cranes. A being 15 or 20 feet tall, proportionally stronger, could manipulate stones that would crush a human. To them, a 100-ton block might be heavy but manageable. And if they built, they would have built to their own scale. Which raises a final, unsettling thought. What if the massive stones we find were not meant to impress us, but were simply ordinary to their makers? What if the walls we marvel at were, to them, mundane? In 1983, a team of Japanese engineers attempted to replicate the construction of the Great Pyramid using modern tools and techniques. They failed. The goal was modest. Move and place a single block of stone, weighing roughly 2.5 tons, using only the methods believed available to ancient Egyptians' wooden sledges, ropes, levers, and ramps. Despite weeks of effort, the team struggled to maneuver even this relatively small block. Scaling the experiment up to the largest stones in the pyramid, some weighing 70 tons, proved impractical. The conclusion, reluctantly reached, was that the ancient builders either possessed techniques modern engineers do not fully understand, or they employed methods that have been lost to history. This is not unique to Egypt. At Tiwanaku in Bolivia, stones weighing over 130 tons were transported from quarries 10 miles away. The terrain includes rivers, valleys, and altitude changes of over 1,000 feet. No wheels, no draft animals large enough to pull such weight. Yet the stones arrived, and they were placed with precision. The H-blocks of Puma Punku, part of the same complex, are cut with such exactness that they appear machined. Edges meet at perfect right angles. Surfaces are polished smooth. Some researchers have suggested advanced tools, perhaps even lost technologies, but no evidence of such tools has been found. In Japan, the Ishino Hoden megalith is a single piece of stone, carved directly from the bedrock, weighing an estimated 500 tons. It was never moved because it could not be. It simply sits there, half-finished, an enigma carved in place. Why was it made? No one knows. Mainstream explanations emphasize human ingenuity. Ancient peoples, they argue, were not primitive. They were brilliant problem solvers who worked within their constraints. Given enough time, enough labor, and enough trial and error, even the most massive stones could be moved. And yet, when modern attempts fail, the gap between theory and practice widens. Some alternative researchers propose that ancient builders had access to knowledge we have forgotten: acoustic levitation, sonic manipulation, geopolymer chemistry that allowed stones to be poured rather than carved. Others suggest extraterrestrial intervention, though this explanation raises more questions than it answers. But there is another possibility, quieter and older, that the stones were moved by beings for whom such work was not miraculous, but natural. That the legends of giants are not metaphors for human strength, but memories of actual strength that exceeded our own. That the walls, the temples, the megaliths scattered across every continent were built in an age when size was not an obstacle, because the builders themselves were built to a different scale. We stand before these stones today with cranes and computers, and still we struggle. What does that say about who or what moved them first? The past is not just distant, it is alien. We imagine ancient times as simply long ago, as if the world then was merely an older version of the world now. But the Earth itself was different. The air, the climate, the very physics of survival operated under conditions we can only reconstruct through inference and ice cores. Go back 20,000 years to the peak of the last ice age, sea levels were 400 feet lower. Entire land masses that are now underwater were exposed coastlines where humans and megafauna would have lived, hunted, built. The Bering Land Bridge connected Asia to North America. The British Isles were part of continental Europe. Indonesia and Australia were linked by dry land. The climate was colder, but not uniformly so. Some regions were glacial wastelands. Others were temperate refuges, lush with vegetation. The distribution of life was entirely different from what we know today. But it was not just geography that differed. The atmosphere itself may have been subtly different. During the Carboniferous period, over 300 million years ago, oxygen levels reached as high as 35%, significantly higher than today's 21%. This allowed insects to grow to enormous sizes. Dragonflies with 2-foot wingspans, millipedes 6 feet long. More oxygen meant more energy, more growth potential, more size. By the time of the Ice Age, oxygen levels had stabilized closer to modern norms. But even small variations, 22%, 23%, could have had profound effects on metabolism, stamina, and the upper limits of biological size. Could slightly higher oxygen levels have supported larger humanoid beings? Mainstream biology is cautious. Oxygen alone does not determine size. There are structural limits imposed by bone density, muscle efficiency, and the square cube law, which states that as an organism grows, its volume increases faster than its surface area, creating structural stress. A human scaled to 15 feet tall would face serious challenges. Bones would need to be disproportionately thick. Hearts would struggle to pump blood to the brain. Joints would wear down rapidly under increased weight. But evolution is adaptive. If conditions favored size, if resources were abundant, if threats required it, if environmental pressures selected for it, biology finds a way. Whales grew to the size of buildings. Sauropods stretched over 100 feet. Gigantopithecus stood 10 feet tall on 2 legs. If the Earth made giants of animals, could it not have made giants of something more? There is also the question of gravity. Some alternative theorists propose that Earth's gravity may have been slightly weaker in the distant past, allowing for larger organisms. Mainstream physics rejects this. Planetary gravity is determined by mass, and Earth's mass has been stable for billions of years. But the idea persists in speculative circles, tied to theories of expanding Earth or fluctuations in planetary density. These remain fringe concepts, unsupported by geological evidence. What is undeniable, though, is that the ancient world provided niches for size. Vast forests with towering trees, open plains with megafauna that required strength to hunt or avoid, climates that rewarded endurance and bulk. If intelligent giants existed, they would not have evolved in isolation. They would have been part of an ecosystem, shaped by the same forces that made mammoths and ground sloths. And when that ecosystem collapsed, when the Ice Age ended, when climates shifted, when resources became scarce, size would have become a liability. The giants of the animal kingdom vanished. Could the giants of legend have followed the same path? Not through war, not through divine punishment, but through the slow, inexorable pressure of a changing world? The ancients looked up, not casually, the way we glance at our phones to check the weather. They studied the sky. They mapped its movements, tracked its cycles, wove its patterns into the fabric of their myths and rituals. And in those myths, the giants were not only of the earth, they were of the heavens. In Greek mythology, the Titans were children of Uranus, the sky itself. Cronus, their king, was associated with time and the harvest, but also with Saturn, the planet that bears his Roman name. The war between Titans and Olympian gods was not just terrestrial, it was cosmic, a reshuffling of celestial order. In Norse cosmology, the giant emir's body became the world itself, his flesh the earth, his blood the seas, his skull the dome of the sky. The giants were woven into the structure of reality, inseparable from the forces that govern stars and seasons. The Nephilim, in some interpretations of ancient Hebrew texts, were said to be offspring of the sons of God, beings who descended from the heavens. Whether this is metaphor, mistranslation, or memory of something else, the link between giants and the sky persists. Why? One possibility is that ancient peoples associated size with celestial significance. The largest things they could see, mountains, the horizon, the vault of heaven, became personified as giants. The Titans were not literal beings, but symbols of natural grandeur scaled to mythic proportions. But another interpretation has emerged in alternative research circles. What if the giants were astronomers? What if their size gave them perspective literally? A being 15 or 20 feet tall would have a vantage point we lack. They could see further, observe celestial events more clearly, track the movement of stars with greater precision. Some megalithic sites, Stonehenge, Karnak, the Giza pyramids, are aligned with astronomical events, solstices, equinoxes, the rising of certain stars. Mainstream archaeology attributes this to human ingenuity, and rightly so. Ancient peoples were skilled sky watchers, but the precision of some alignments is startling. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60th of a single degree. The shafts inside point toward specific stars: Sirius, Orion's belt, Thuban, and Draco. Whether this was intentional or coincidental is debated, but the correlation exists. At Göbekli Tepe, some researchers have suggested that the stone pillars represent constellations, a star map carved in 3 dimensions. If true, it would mean that 11,000 years ago, someone was thinking in terms of cosmic architecture. Were these sky watchers human? Or were they something else, beings who lived longer, saw more, remembered celestial cycles across generations in ways that oral tradition alone could not preserve. In Sumerian mythology, the Anunnaki were often depicted as giant beings who brought knowledge from the heavens' astronomy, agriculture, metallurgy. Mainstream scholars interpret these as gods, not literal visitors. But the myths are precise in their descriptions: measurements, timelines, celestial events. Why would purely symbolic gods need such specificity? Alternative theorists, particularly those influenced by the work of Zecharia Sitchin, have suggested that the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial visitors. This remains deeply controversial and widely dismissed by academia. But stripped of the extraterrestrial angle, a simpler question remains. What if the giants were human or humanoid, and simply lived at a time when the sky was more important than the ground, when survival depended on knowing when rains would come, when migrations would occur, when the stars aligned for planting or harvest? In such a world, the sky watchers would be revered. Their knowledge would be sacred. And over time, as their civilization faded, they would be remembered not as people, but as gods. Tall, powerful, cosmic, titans of both earth and heaven. The ancients looked up, not casually, the way we glance at our phones to check the weather. They studied the sky. They mapped its movements, tracked its cycles, wove its patterns into the fabric of their myths and rituals. And in those myths, the giants were not only of the earth, they were of the heavens. In Greek mythology, the Titans were children of Uranus, the sky itself. Cronus, their king, was associated with time and the harvest, but also with Saturn, the planet that bears his Roman name. The war between Titans and Olympian gods was not just terrestrial, it was cosmic, a reshuffling of celestial order. In Norse cosmology, the giant Ymir's body became the world itself, his flesh the earth, his blood the seas, his skull the dome of the sky. The giants were woven into the structure of reality, inseparable from the forces that govern stars and seasons. The Nephilim, in some interpretations of ancient Hebrew texts, were said to be offspring of the sons of God, beings who descended from the heavens. Whether this is metaphor, mistranslation, or memory of something else, the link between giants and the sky persists. Why? One possibility is that ancient peoples associated size with celestial significance. The largest things they could see, mountains, the horizon, the vault of heaven, became personified as giants. The Titans were not literal beings, but symbols of natural grandeur scaled to mythic proportions. But another interpretation has emerged in alternative research circles. What if the giants were astronomers? What if their size gave them perspective literally? A being 15 or 20 feet tall would have a vantage point we lack. They could see further, observe celestial events more clearly, track the movement of stars with greater precision. Some megalithic sites, Stonehenge, Karnak, the Giza pyramids, are aligned with astronomical events, solstices, equinoxes, the rising of certain stars. Mainstream archaeology attributes this to human ingenuity, and rightly so. Ancient peoples were skilled sky watchers, but the precision of some alignments is startling. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60th of a single degree. The shafts inside point toward specific stars: Sirius, Orion's belt, Thuban, and Draco. Whether this was intentional or coincidental is debated, but the correlation exists. At Göbekli Tepe, some researchers have suggested that the stone pillars represent constellations, a star map carved in 3 dimensions. If true, it would mean that 11,000 years ago, someone was thinking in terms of cosmic architecture. Were these sky watchers human? Or were they something else, beings who lived longer, saw more, remembered celestial cycles across generations in ways that oral tradition alone could not preserve? In Sumerian mythology, the Anunnaki were often depicted as giant beings who brought knowledge from the heavens' astronomy, agriculture, metallurgy. Mainstream scholars interpret these as gods, not literal visitors. But the myths are precise in their descriptions. Measurements, timelines, celestial events. Why would purely symbolic gods need such specificity? Alternative theorists, particularly those influenced by the work of Zecharia Sitchin, have suggested that the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial visitors. This remains deeply controversial and widely dismissed by academia. But stripped of the extraterrestrial angle, a simpler question remains. What if the giants were human or humanoid, and simply lived at a time when the sky was more important than the ground, when survival depended on knowing when rains would come, when migrations would occur, when the stars aligned for planting or harvest? In such a world, the sky watchers would be revered. Their knowledge would be sacred. And over time, as their civilization faded, they would be remembered not as people, but as gods. Tall, powerful, cosmic, titans of both earth and heaven. Every titan myth ends the same way. In blood. The Greek Titanomachy describes a war that lasted 10 years, a brutal conflict between the old gods, the Titans, and the new, the Olympians led by Zeus. Mountains were hurled as weapons. The earth split open. The sky burned. In the end, the Titans were defeated, cast down into Tartarus, a prison beneath the underworld, locked away forever. In Norse mythology, the Geirvanir War saw gods and giants locked in endless conflict, a cycle of violence that would not end until Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, when the world itself would burn and be reborn. In Hindu epics, the Daityas and Asuras waged cosmic wars against the Devas, divine battles that reshaped continents and oceans, conflicts so vast they were measured not in years, but in ages. The Bible describes the Nephilim as mighty warriors, legends of old, but their presence is framed as corruption, a violation of divine order, followed swiftly by the great flood that wiped the world clean. Mainstream mythology scholars interpret these stories as allegory. The wars of the gods represent the triumph of civilization over chaos, order over entropy, the new over the old. The Titans are the wild forces of nature, earthquakes, storms, volcanoes personified, and then defeated by the structured, rational rule of law embodied by the Olympians. These are not historical events. They are cultural narratives, ways of explaining the world and humanity's place within it. But alternative thinkers ask, what if the myths are not allegories, but memories? What if, thousands of years ago, there was a real conflict not between gods, but between populations? Between an older, larger species and a younger, smaller one? Between titans and humans? There is precedent for interspecies conflict. Homo sapiens coexisted with Neanderthals for thousands of years. There is evidence of interbreeding, but also evidence of competition, displacement, and possibly violence. Neanderthals went extinct around 40,000 years ago. We do not know if humans hunted them, outcompeted them, or simply outlasted them, but we survived, and they did not. If another humanoid species existed larger, stronger, but perhaps fewer in number, or less adaptable, could the same dynamic have played out? The myths describe titans as powerful, but ultimately defeated, not because they were weak, but because they were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, or betrayed. Zeus defeats Cronus not through brute strength, but through cunning. Humans, historically, have never been the strongest species, but we have been the most adaptable, the most strategic, the most capable of cooperation on a massive scale. If titans existed and were displaced, it would not have required divine intervention. It would have required time, pressure, and the slow, grinding advantage of numbers. There is another layer to consider. Many ancient sites show signs of catastrophic destruction. Burned layers, collapsed walls, sudden abandonment. The city of Katoyuk in Turkey, one of the world's oldest urban centers, shows evidence of repeated fires. Jericho's walls, famously, came tumbling down, though whether by earthquake, siege, or something else remains debated. At the end of the Younger Dryas period, around 11,600 years ago, the Earth experienced rapid climate change. Temperatures spiked, ice sheets melted, sea levels rose. Some researchers propose an impact event, a comet or asteroid, that triggered these changes. Could this have been the war remembered in myth? Not a battle between armies, but a cataclysm so profound it felt like divine wrath? A collapse so total that survivors could only describe it as the gods fighting? The myths agree on one thing. The old order fell. The Titans were overthrown, imprisoned, or destroyed. And in their place, a new age began. An age of smaller beings. An age of humans. In archaeology, there are moments when the earth reveals violence. Not the violence of war between known civilizations, documented in texts and treaties, but something older, stranger, harder to explain. These moments appear as asterisk layers asterisk, black carbon layers indicating widespread fire, ash deposits that blanket entire regions, sediment that suggests sudden catastrophic flooding, sites abandoned mid-construction, tools left where they fell, as if the inhabitants fled and never returned. At Tal el-Hammam in Jordan, excavations uncovered a layer of destruction dated to around 1650 BCE. The heat was so intense it melted pottery, fused mud bricks, and turned the surface of the ground into glass. No evidence of warfare was found. No arrowheads, no skeletons arranged in battle positions. Some researchers have proposed an airburst event, a meteor exploding in the atmosphere, releasing energy equivalent to a nuclear weapon. The heat and shockwave would have obliterated everything within miles. Interestingly, Tal el-Hammam's location and timeline have led some to speculate it could be the biblical Sodom, destroyed by fire from heaven. Meanwhile, across the world in India, the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro shows similar anomalies. Skeletons found in the streets as if death came suddenly. Layers of vitrified stone. Radiation levels slightly above normal, though not conclusively abnormal. For decades, fringe theorists claimed Mohenjo-Daro was destroyed by ancient nuclear weapons, a theory rejected by mainstream archaeology. The evidence suggests flooding, disease, or ecological collapse, far more mundane, but no less devastating. Yet the stories persist. In myth, the wars of the gods were apocalyptic. Mountains thrown, seas boiled, entire races erased. Could these destruction layers be echoes of such events? Not literal divine battles, but real catastrophes, impacts, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes experienced by people who had no framework to explain them except through the language of gods and giants. There is a pattern in human memory. Trauma compresses into myth. The eruption of Thera, which destroyed the Minoan civilization around 1600 BCE, may have inspired the legend of Atlantis. The Black Sea flood, when rising waters breached the Bosphorus around 5600 BCE, may be the root of flood myths across Mesopotamia, Greece, and beyond. If a civilization existed before these cataclysms, one that included beings we now call Titans, their destruction would have been remembered, not as geology, but as war. Not as climate shift, but as divine punishment. And the survivors, smaller and more fragile, would tell their children, the giants fell, the old world burned, and we are what remains. Not all myths end in total extinction. Some tell a different story, one of survival, integration, and bloodlines that linger. In Greek mythology, not all Titans were imprisoned. Prometheus, who gave fire to humanity, was punished but not destroyed. Atlas was condemned to hold up the sky, but he endured. Some Titans faded into obscurity, neither fully defeated nor fully gone. And then there are the demigods. Heracles, son of Zeus, an immortal woman. Perseus, Achilles, Theseus heroes, described as larger, stronger, more capable than ordinary men. Their bloodlines were said to carry divine ancestry, a trace of the old power diluted but not erased. In Norse mythology, gods and giants frequently intermarry. Odin himself, king of the Geir, has giant ancestry. Thor's mother is a giantess. Loki, trickster and catalyst of Ragnarok, is a giant who lives among the gods. This is not war, it is integration. The Bible describes the Nephilim as mighty men of old, men of renown. The text does not say they were all destroyed. It says they existed and were legendary. Some interpretations suggest their bloodline persisted, diluted over generations, but present nonetheless. The unusually tall warriors mentioned in later biblical texts, Goliath of Gath, the Anakim, are sometimes framed as descendants of this lineage. In Irish folklore, the Tuatha Dé Danann were a race of godlike beings who ruled Ireland before humans. When the Milesians, ancestors of the Irish, arrived, the Tuatha Dé Danann retreated into the hills and mounds, becoming the fair folk, the Fae. They did not disappear, they withdrew, living alongside humanity in hidden places. These myths share a common thread. The old beings did not vanish completely. They adapted, interbred, or retreated. Modern genetics offers a curious parallel. We now know that Homo sapiens interbred with Neanderthals. Most people of European and Asian descent carry 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. We also interbred with Denisovans, another extinct human species. Traces of their genes persist in Melanesian and Aboriginal Australian populations. We are not purely Homo sapiens. We are hybrids. Could the same have occurred with another, less documented humanoid species? The challenge is evidence. Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA is identifiable because we have their bones, their genome sequenced, reference points to compare. If another species existed and interbred with humans, we would need their DNA to prove it. But what if their genetic signature is already there, buried in the noise of human variation? Certain populations have unusual traits. Extreme height, the Dinka of South Sudan, averaging over 6 feet. Extraordinary strength, highland Sherpas with enhanced oxygen processing. Unique skeletal proportions. Mainstream anthropology explains these through natural selection and environmental adaptation, and rightly so. Humans are incredibly diverse. But in the margins of speculation, the question lingers. Could some of these traits be echoes of something older? Not proof, but possibility. The myths do not describe total annihilation. They describe fading, integration, the slow blending of old blood into new. If Titans existed, perhaps they did not disappear. Perhaps they became us. Size is not always an advantage. In the long view of evolution, the largest are often the first to fall when conditions change. The dinosaurs, dominant for 165 million years, vanished when an asteroid struck 66 million years ago. The mammals that survived were small, adaptable, capable of hiding, scavenging, enduring. The megafauna of the Ice Age mammoths, giant sloths, saber-toothed cats disappeared as climates warmed and ecosystems shifted. Humans may have hunted some to extinction, but many simply could not adapt fast enough. Size requires resources. A mammoth needed vast quantities of vegetation daily. A giant ground sloth required dense forests. When those resources dwindled, the giants starved. Smaller creatures with lower metabolic demands survived. If Titans existed, they would have faced the same pressure. Imagine it being 15 feet tall, proportionally built. They would need exponentially more food than a 6-foot human. More water, more space, more energy just to maintain their body temperature. In a world of abundance, this is manageable. But after the Ice Age ended, the world changed rapidly. Forests shrank, grasslands expanded, megafauna populations collapsed, reducing available protein. Human populations grew, spreading into every habitable niche, competing for the same resources. A Titan in such a world would be a liability to itself. Too large to hide, too hungry to sustain, too slow to adapt. The myths describe Titans as mighty, but ultimately defeated. Perhaps their defeat was not military, it was ecological. They did not fall to swords and spears. They fell to scarcity, to a world that no longer had room for them. There is a biological principle called Cope's rule *, which observes that species tend to evolve toward larger body sizes over time until environmental pressure reverses the trend. When climates shift, when food becomes scarce, when competition intensifies, smaller variants survive better. The species shrinks, or it dies out entirely. If titans were real, they may have faced exactly this. And humanity's smaller, more efficient, more socially cooperative would have thrived in the niches they left behind. This is not a war of annihilation. It is the quiet, relentless logic of survival. The strong do not always inherit the earth. The adaptable do. And in the end, the giants may not have been overthrown by force. They may have simply been outlasted, outbred, outcompeted, outadapted by a species that could do more with less. The world shrank, and the titans, too large for the age that followed, faded into memory. If titans existed, their greatest evidence is not what they left, it is what they did not. No cities scaled to their size. No tools designed for 15-foot hands. No skeletal remains definitively classified as humanoid giants. Only silence. And yet, that silence is not empty. It is filled with anomalies. Stones too heavy, myths too consistent, structures too precise, gaps in the timeline too convenient. Mainstream science is right to demand evidence. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and proof is absent. But absence is not disproof. It is simply absence. Consider what would remain of our civilization if it vanished tomorrow. Concrete crumbles, steel rusts, glass shatters. Within 1,000 years, most cities would be overgrown, foundations buried beneath sediment and vegetation. Within 10,000 years, nearly everything would be gone. A few pyramids, perhaps, some stone monuments, trace chemicals in the soil. If another species arose 1,000,000 years from now and tried to reconstruct our existence, what would they find? Fragments, anomalies, stones that seemed too precisely cut, traces of metals that did not belong. And they might ask, were these natural formations? Or did someone build them? If titans existed and disappeared 50,000 years ago, before the last ice age, before written history, before even the earliest human civilizations, what would remain? Bones, if buried in the right conditions. But fossilization is rare, and the older the remains, the less likely they are to survive. Structures, if built from stone, but stone erodes, shifts, gets repurposed by later cultures. Myths, always myths, because myths are flexible. They adapt, they travel, they embed themselves into new languages and new cultures. They survive long after the truth has dissolved. The silence left by the titans is not proof they never existed. It is proof that time is ruthless, that the earth consumes its own history. That absence, in deep time, is the default state. We are only beginning to explore the submerged coastlines, the deep jungles, the ice-locked plateaus, where ancient evidence might still rest. Every year, new discoveries rewrite small pieces of the timeline. A site older than expected, a tool more sophisticated than it should be, a genetic anomaly that defies easy categorization. The past is not settled. It is still revealing itself. And in that slow revelation, the possibility remains that the titans were real, that they walked where we now walk, that they built, loved, fought, and faded, not into myth by choice, but by the inexorable passage of ages. And all that is left is the question, the stones, the stories, and the silence. The world belongs to the small now. Humans, averaging 5 to 6 feet, have spread across every continent. We have built cities that scrape the sky, carved tunnels through mountains, sent machines beyond our atmosphere. We are, by any measure, dominant. But we did not build this dominance on strength. We built it on adaptability, on cooperation. on the ability to outthink rather than overpower. If Titans existed, they ruled by presence by sheer physical scale. We ruled by thought. And that, perhaps, is the greatest difference. The myths tell us that after the Titans fell, a new age began. The age of gods, then the age of heroes, then the age of men. But what if it is not a sequence, but a replacement? What if humanity did not rise asterisk with asterisk the Titans, but asterisk after asterisk them? What if the world we inherited was not empty, but vacated? Consider the stones again. We did not build Baalbek's foundation. We did not carve Pumapunku's H-blocks. We did not raise the first megaliths at Göbekli Tepe. We found them, and we built on top of them, attributing them to our ancestors, because we had no other explanation. But what if they were not ours to begin with? What if we are living in the ruins of an older world, one built to a scale we can barely comprehend by beings whose memory we have compressed into gods and monsters? This is not a claim, it is a question that hovers over every unexplained megalith, every myth of giants, every bone too large for its time. We may never answer it definitively. The evidence may be too eroded, too scattered, too lost to time. But the asking, the wondering, that is valuable in itself, because it reminds us that history is not complete, that the past still holds mysteries we have not solved, that beneath our feet, beneath the cities and farms and highways, there may rest the traces of something we have forgotten, or something we never knew existed. The Titans, if they were real, are gone now, but their absence is a presence, their silence, a weight. And as we stand before the megaliths they may have left behind, as we read the myths passed down through 100 generations, as we wonder why the stories are so persistent, so global, so strangely detailed, we are left with a choice: to dismiss it all as fantasy, or to admit that we do not know everything, that the earth is older than our certainty, that the deep past may hold more than bones and stone. It may hold memory, compressed, distorted, mythologized, but rooted in something real, something that once walked here, something vast, something we call Titans. And if you have followed this journey, if you have wandered alongside us, questioned the stones, listened to the myths, stood in the shadow of the megaliths, then perhaps you understand why the question endures. Not because we have proof, but because the absence of proof is not the same as proof of absence. And in that space, the space between knowing and not knowing, the Titans still walk. Not in body, but in memory, in stone, in the questions we cannot stop asking. And if this journey has moved you, if it has sparked your curiosity, if it has made you look at the ancient world with new eyes, then consider joining us for more mysteries, more questions, more journeys into the unknown. Because the past is not dead, it is simply waiting for us to listen.